All right, welcome. Happy Friday, everybody. Oh my goodness. TGIF, even though it is a little rainy here in Boston, hope wherever you guys are tuning in from, it's a lovely day and it's going to be a lovely session. I'm super excited. I have my good friend, my marketing bestie, my business partner in crime, Michelle Hacunda, on the call. Michelle and I have actually been working together for about 3 years. Oh my gosh, wow. Time flies when you're having fun. We started our entrepreneurial journeys around the same time, and she had reached out to just chit chat, and it turns out she also works in life science, and we just had so much in common. And ever since then, we've partnered on a lot of different projects together. We have retainer clients that we work on together. And she has just been a superstar for me. And I have truly loved partnering with her and her sister as well. So we have a good little crew going on. So it only felt natural to bring Michelle on for this conversation. As you guys remember from last week, we talked with Bethany about reducing your marketing time through automation. She talked a lot about different tactics for really just not spending all day creating content. So I thought it was perfect to continue that with some very real examples and discussions about what does that look like? How do we do that in practice? Especially because Michelle and I work so tactically together and we do reuse content a lot. That is a huge part of our strategy for good reason. So I thought no one better to talk about this than Michelle Hacunda of Michelle Hacunda Consulting. Give us a little intro about yourself so I don't forget anything, and then we'll just get right into it.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. Thank you for the kind words too. So as Lauren mentioned, my name is Michelle. I've worked in the marketing and communications space for now about 12 years. And my formal training is as an undergrad, I went for comm studies. I went back to school for communication management. So I love being in the communications and marketing space. I worked for a number of years in-house in a couple different industries. I started my career within the higher education space, working at colleges and universities across Massachusetts, and then switched into the life sciences and pharma space at a couple of different organizations. And a few years ago, then decided to start my own marketing agency. And with that, I have a focus on content strategy, content marketing, and social media management, and love getting to work with clients all across the country and primarily focused in the health and wellness space, and also do work with some organizations outside of that as well.
Yeah, and that's how we really have become such great partners because those fields really overlap with the work that we're doing at Lauren Perna Comms. And we really consider Michelle and her team a true partner. If you go on our website, you will see she is on our partner page. And one particular client in the life science industry that we've worked on for a couple of years now, we have gone back and forth with figuring out various strategies. But one thing that we've done pretty consistently is reusing content. This client is a thought leader in the life science industry. They put out a lot of research reports. And it's not a traditional social media campaign where you have products or services you're selling. Really, the product is the research. So that means there is a finite number of things that you can put out, within reason. So one thing that we have learned how to do really well is reusing our content. However, the funny part is I booked this session with Michelle, and then we decided to switch up the strategy. And we really wanted to be honest about that because we want you to understand that that is truly how social media works. Is that Michelle and I have this like awesome strategy going on, and just the other week we were like, yeah, we got to switch it up. So that's the truth, is that if you think even the marketers have it figured out, guys, we don't. I mean, we do, but we don't. Just like you, the algorithm is always changing and things are always changing. But that's really where the metrics come in. And that's why metrics are so important. So we can keep tabs. But let's talk about, why we even would consider reusing content. I think one of the other misnomers is that you always have to create new content. Why do even the best marketers, like present company, don't have to create new content? Why is it cool for us to just reuse?
Yeah, so with reusing content, what I like to think about it is not everything has to be net new content that you're starting from scratch, because you can truly create a consistent presence while reusing material. And in that case, you're focusing more on engagement versus being constantly in production mode, because when you're creating net new content, that is always going to be a heavier lift. Not to say you don't do that. There's a time and a place for it. But if you're doing that every single time for something that you could repurpose, then you're spending all your energy in the production mode versus engagement. So one of the reasons I would say is certainly saving time and getting creative with how to repurpose it. But then the other thing is, not all of your audiences, if you post something once, and I think many of us know this, especially in the social media space, but it's true outside of social media, if you send something over email to your customers, whatever medium you're using, just because you send something out once doesn't mean everybody has their eyes on it. We probably all have heard of the stat, which tells us we have to see something multiple times in order to register and remember it. And that's true as we think about content. So if you're able to repurpose something and put it out in a few different ways, then you're more likely to get people to connect with that message versus just having a one and done strategy. And then I would also say it's not about being repetitive, because I think sometimes, maybe not marketers, but if you're outside of the marketer or communicator space, you might think, well, am I just repeating content? Isn't that not a good strategy because we're not being creative about it? But the truth is, it actually does require a lot of creativity to think about how you repurpose something. And you have to think about, what kind of format am I going to repurpose it in? What's a new way to share this message so I'm not just repeating something? I think of this all the time when I'm writing content, whether it's social media or something else, that if a company says to me, well, we still want to talk about this topic, I have to think about, okay, well, I already stated or shared it in a certain way. So now I got to think about it in a different presentation, in a different way to present it, different presentation manner, because I can't just put out the same content time and time again. So there's a lot of ways that you would want to think about repurposing content and reusing it, because it's has a lot of benefits, not only on the time front, but also to be able to reach your audience and make sure you're getting the message out properly.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think that, one thing that we have both done is really that creativity. How do you exactly, think about repurposing that content? And it does, like you said, you do have to kind of put some thought into it. And, because sure, you could certainly just copy and paste the exact same thing that you've done. But I think where the gold is just being that little bit creative and putting a little bit of a spin on it. So how do you want to tell us a little bit about how we've approached that with our shared client, or you've done it in the past? And then we'll talk about kind of the reasons why we decided to, we didn't put a full kibosh on repurposing, we just cut it back. But we can talk a little bit about that too. But tell us, what do you look for? How do you do that? I think, like, give some tactical tips for folks that are like, okay, I don't even know where to begin.
Yes. So if we're thinking about how do we even begin to repurpose content, something that you mentioned earlier, Lauren, is data analytics. And that's a really good starting place. I can say I think it's true for so many of us that are in the marketing or comm space, that the data is what our clients or what our companies are interested in. we need to also be looking at that on a regular basis, especially at a minimum monthly, but truly looking at it every time we're posting content and really getting a sense of like what's resonating with people, what do they want to see. And so if we're thinking about a reusing or repurposing strategy, we want to think about what are those top categories or pillars of content that people are interested in. So that's content themes that a company is talking about. And we also want to get a sense of, are there certain formats? And we just talked about this on the other day on a call that we were on, but are there certain content formats versus others that are really standing out? And so if you're going about creating a strategy and ideally you have a calendar that's in place, you want to think about, as you build out that calendar on a monthly basis, how do you look at the top performing pieces of content that you've used in the past, and then get really clear on if that was a top performing piece of content. Let's say if it was a video that you put out, how do you then continue to use that video and create other prongs or legs off of that, so that way it doesn't just be something that only appears once, that it continues on. And then also you want to think about, as you're adapting that piece of content, how can it take the form of other media? So if it's something that was a video, could that become a blog, or could it become an email? And specifically, as we're talking about the example of the client that we both work on, they have reports, for instance, that come out on a regular basis. They're constantly publishing research. And from that, we had been thinking about, with the content repurposing, how do we take this research that's really detailed, and it could be a report that's 20-40 pages, and how do we take that and develop content off of it and make it meaningful for people? And then just because we put it out once doesn't mean, again, that somebody's seeing it. So how do we think about presenting that in a way that's most impactful, whether it's through a graphic with a really interesting stat, or a quote that really summarizes the content that's within the report. And what we had been doing with the repurposing of that content is we would initially put out content when the report came out and published, but we also knew that with a lot of the reports for this client in the healthcare space, it lives on, and the trends that come out are still relevant weeks or even months after that report, because it could be a report that's looking at something a year in advance or a couple years in advance, and doing that research. And so with our strategy, we would get a sense of, okay, what was the content that was performing really strongly, and how do we make sure with these certain pieces of content that we present it in a fresh way? So maybe there's a webinar that comes out that is a follow-up from that report. And from there, if there's a webinar, we take some of those video clips, and then we're presenting that data that other people are talking about in a new way. So it's constantly looking at how does this have the most meaning? And as you mentioned, we have switched up the strategy, and that's why the data is so important, because something that you start out doing could totally change as you're looking into it deeper.
And we really want to, when we prepped for this, we really wanted to make sure that you guys understand that, just because we come up with a strategy that is working doesn't mean it's going to work forever, whether it's, whether we're talking about an overall strategy or just a type of content. The other day I was telling Michelle, I was like, I was reading that videos are more important now on LinkedIn, and we've really been focusing on carousels. So how do we switch that up without putting all of our eggs in the video basket, knowing that, we're actually doing really well on carousel. So that's fine that, the direction is going into videos. So let's incorporate it a little bit, but we don't want to just, throw caution to the wind and completely, abandon the strategy that is seemingly working for us. We just know to keep our eyes on it. And that's, we can tell you a little bit about why we decided to scale back our repurposing strategy. So this client is on LinkedIn and Twitter. And as you guys know, Twitter has undergone some major changes. So in an effort to try and get more eyes on our content, part of our strategy had been to repurpose one or two tweets a day from a couple months prior. As Michelle said, this content is relevant for a couple months, weeks, and it's data, so people aren't going to remember one data point from 3 months ago. So that's why we felt it was important to incorporate these data points, reuse these data points and posts on a regular basis. And we also did some social listening. However, and that worked for a while, I would say. It ended up getting to the point where we got the impressions, we got the eyeballs on the content, which is great. And then people stopped engaging. And that's really the kind of knowledge of understanding what the data is telling you. And Bethany actually talked about that a lot last week too, is that, it's great if we're getting eyeballs on it. If no one's engaging with it, then we just need to cut that back. And that's okay. This is all part of the process, but Michelle, I'll let you, talk a little bit about the process too, about how we kind of made that decision and why we went in that direction. Feel free to, tell your version.
Yeah, so I would say, like Lauren was mentioning, so we were repurposing and pulling out content, and we were having that be a couple of tweets that were going out per day, for instance, with that platform, and then the social listening piece. And I think as we realized, okay, it's getting eyeballs on it, but it's not getting the engagement, that led us to say, well, we want people to actually be interacting with the content. And I think we have seen in the past, even with social media platforms, that some of these channels like Twitter, X, have wanted, okay, let's post multiple times a day. That used to be the norm, and put out multiple tweets. And the more that you were putting out, the more likely you were to get eyes on content and getting people to engage. And that worked for us for a while. But when we started to realize, well, the analytics are no longer supporting this, and it seems like maybe there's just too much content going out, and we need to scale back from that and think about, okay, what maybe the repurposing right now is needs to be thought of in a new way, and figure out what's going to be most meaningful to people. Then we wanted to go back and revise the strategy. And we can say we're short while into this. We haven't been changing up the strategy for too long, but so far what we've been seeing, it has been making a positive impact with altering the strategy. And so that's been really great to see, that just from making some of those shifts, that we're now getting the numbers to be where we want them to be and getting the engagement back up there. So yeah, I think a key takeaway is don't be afraid to switch things up just because you've done something for one way. Whether you're working for a company or you have your own clients, you want to continue to advocate for what's best, and think about, okay, maybe repurposing looks a little different. For instance, now we might have switched our listening strategy. We might have scaled back on the number of posts, but something that we are still doing is, as it relates to awareness months. So especially in the healthcare space, we know that there's so many different awareness months, depending on what therapeutic area you're in or specialty. And for this client, they do research on a variety of different topics. And with that, we can still think about repurposing content when they have awareness days, because say if they have something that relates in its awareness day related to brain health, well, there might be a past report that talks about some of the trends that have to do with like Alzheimer's disease and research there, or really anything related to brain health. And we're still going to pull from those reports that have been published and think about presenting it and connecting it to this particular awareness day. So there's still a time and a place for it. It's just for us being able to get creative with it and not be tied to one way of doing it, thinking about where does it
Exactly.
come in as we're working with this particular client.
And now, so again, you know me, I like to give everyone technical points. So, how do you or me or people track what you are repurposing? Because I can just feel the wheels turning, people watching this thinking like, okay, cool. So how do I know what I've done? How do I know what to go back to? At Law and Print Comms, we use a program called Notion. But tell us a little bit about how you might, if you're talking to your students about doing this type of strategy, how would you tell them to really implement? Because like you guys know, I like to give you tactical tips. We are not going to gatekeep here. Like I said, we use Notion, but Michelle, tell us a little bit about the logistics of doing something like this.
Yeah, no gatekeeping here. So with doing something like this, I am always going to be an advocate for you got to start with your calendar. And Lauren, you mentioned Notion. So the calendar can be for whatever channel you're looking at. So a lot of people, for instance, with the example of social media, you would have a social media calendar in place. And there's so many different ways to develop something like this, whether it's tools like Notion. I've had some clients that really like still using something like Google Sheets because they can keep it organized within that. There's the platform, the social media management platforms and tools themselves where they have different technology now that's available. One that I've used quite a bit is Sprout Social.
Yes.
And with that, you can have your own calendar built within it. So there's endless tools on the market for things like this, but the true starting place is you want to have your content calendar. And I do this all the time as I'm working with different companies and clients, is you want to be looking at that on a regular basis to have an understanding as you're mapping things out. Well, if I am going to be looking at repurposing something and I've done my work and I've looked at the analytics, let's really call that out and be clear that if we're going to pull something that had been used before, what's the new format that we're going to use? What does that look like? So you want to have the calendar for any medium and really plot out what that's going to be looking like. And then I would say on top of that, you also want to make sure you're communicating with any of your cross-functional partners that you're working with. That's an important piece of this too. So if you're working with a design team and they need to you're repurposing something, but you need like a shorter clip of it, or you need a new visual element that's going to help to tell the story in a new way, that's important in the process too. Or let's say, another repurposing method that I've seen is with blog content. A lot of companies have content that they've developed that's a little bit more evergreen related to
Yeah.
what they do as a company, but they build that into their strategy. I work with a company now that they have evergreen blog content that maybe was published a year ago, but they will switch up maybe some of the photos within it. They might change the headline. Maybe there's some new stats that came out that are particularly relevant and need to get swapped. And so then they will kind of relaunch those blogs. So I would say you also want to really be working with cross partners. If you have people on the website or you have people design or video, creative teams, basically, that you're having those open lines of communication so you can get things repurposed properly.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And then from there, I would also say, as you're thinking about that, you really want to get a sense of like, okay, how am I tracking this? Like you were talking about. So
Yeah.
with a lot of these tools and with the client that we both work on, they have labels. You might hear it called labels or tags.
Yeah.
But what you want to do is think about what are all the ways that you could start to track this. So if you could set it up by format. So if you know you have different types of format going on social media, that could be video, or it could be actual photos, or if it's graphics, or if it's strictly links that you're driving to, you can create tags or labels that help to define that format. But you can also use labels for audiences that you're speaking to. So if
Yeah.
your company has two primary audiences, then you can be really clear, okay, this is meant for if they were doing B2C and B2B, you could have two labels. This is more B2B content, this is more B2C. You could also do that for specific topics. So let's say there's
Yeah.
5 or 6 topics that the company's always talking about. You can create the labels for that. And by doing this, and I see this now with clients, the ones who really implement the tagging and the labeling, when they go to pull any of the reporting, they're able to really strongly say, okay, well, we now know video content, for instance, performs best, or we know that people are really, really interested in our content about our culture and what that looks
Yeah.
like. So you want to set it up for yourself early on in the process, because then once you get into the rhythm of starting to use this, it's going to be really streamlined, and it's going to make your life easier because you have all the data available to you, because you've gone through, as you're putting the content in to get scheduled, you know what it is tagged with, and then you can go back and pull that information later.
Yeah, and one thing that we started doing this year as we were repurposing, I'm sure she's watching, wonderful Stephanie, started tracking when each image was utilized. And that has really helped us in our repurposing. So when we click on that image, we can see we've used it in February, we used it in April. And that really does help with our reutilization strategy. Obviously, when it was a huge part of our strategy, that was super important. Now that we're scaling back, knowing exactly when we posted it is still important, because we want to make sure that we are not, if we're only sharing this once a month, we don't want to share it end of August, beginning of September. We want to make sure we're spreading it out enough. So having those tags and that strategy that Michelle is talking about is super important. And this is all what your marketing team should be doing for you. And certainly it's there's a lot of nuance to it, so don't get frustrated if this is something that you're like, oh my god, I don't know what I'm doing. It's not a big deal. There's so many platforms. I would highly recommend, if you don't have a program like Notion, downloading one, because all of like the Notions, the Asanas, and ClickUps and all those have templates to help you with this stuff. So really use those free resources that are out there if this is not in your wheelhouse. And if it is, then congratulations, because you're doing it right. And maybe you're just here to get that confirmation. So here we are telling you that if you are doing all the tracking and strategizing of how you're reutilizing content, you're doing all the right things. And if you aren't, there's no better time to start than now. So, Michelle, any imparting words of wisdom? You are a professor, so if this was your students and they were on their last day of content reutilization class, what would you tell them?
I would say that you should really lean into content repurposing and reusing content. And if you hear anything to the contrary, where somebody has the mindset, oh, well, it's not creative, or everything we want to do is net new, that there is a lot of data out there to back up why repurposing has value. And I think what I always recommend to, if a client or if somebody that is new to this is a little wary about repurposing, try a pilot and see what that looks like. Say, let's do this for a month or two and see how it works. And once you start to have that information and the data behind it to say, well, people do actually benefit from seeing messages more than once, and they do benefit from getting information in multiple ways, that it's really worthwhile. And I'll just give one more example that I thought of with this has to do with video content. So many companies create webinars, or they have events, and they have a lot of their leadership presenting at these webinars or events. And that's content where if you have it on demand available, you want to be able to take that and break it into maybe short video clips, or maybe you can take a data point that they mention and you could create a graphic off of that. So you want to be thinking in that way as much as possible, and not be afraid to lean into it, because some of the best content that you see from an ROI perspective is that has been repurposed and thought about in a new way. So I always think once you have boundaries around something as it relates to storytelling and content, you can get more creative within it.
Ooh, I like that. We're gonna steal that as a clip going forward, because we repurpose these all the time, you guys. You will see this once this is, I hang up today. My team puts it up on YouTube, and then, in the following months, we will be pulling clips and sharing it in our newsletter and whatnot, because this is such good content. We've been talking for a half an hour. We could fill a whole month worth of things that Michelle has said. So just remember that people are not going to see everything the first time, and you have so much more content than you think. So reusing is definitely the key. So that is it for today. I want to make sure we keep on time. And next week, we are finishing this out with Alicia Williams of Elise Day, and we're going to talk about recycling for scaling. And just a great way to kind of round out all the wonderful tips that Bethany and Michelle have taught us. So, and then next month, we will announce next month's topic next week. I'm super excited for it. And have a beautiful weekend, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And Michelle, thank you for everything. You've been a wonderful partner in Marketing Crime, and can't wait to do this again. You'll see Michelle again later on at the end of the year. We are going to do a little wrap up, about kind of what we've seen, the kind of LPC and Friends team. So look out for her and her sister at the end of the year.
Thank you so much for
Bye,
having me.
guys.
Bye, everyone.